So, since I just finished watching the first 2 seasons of Code Geass in preparation for the upcoming 3rd season, I thought I'd take the time to do a little review for what I've seen so far. From what I know of the show, Code Geass is highly regarded in the anime community as one of the greats, and with its 8.80 on my anime list, I can safely say my assumption is probably correct. However, and this will no doubt earn me some ire, I found myself watching a much more flawed piece of media than I expected, from the build-up of the show in the eyes of the fans. But it was an entertaining show nonetheless. Before I begin proper, I'd like to mention that Code Geass is an anime that came out a decade ago in the dark ages of 2007, so reviewing it now carries with it some issues. Namely, that a lot of the tropes and story beats the show used are old hat at this point. And since I don't know which of these narrative elements Code Geass popularized, if any, I recommend taking my words with a grain of salt. I am, after all, reviewing this after watching it today in 2017. So, without further ado, I liked it. 7 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this review. Peace out. I'm getting flooded by a hurricane right now. No, but really. Though I did enjoy the show, one of the tropes that bothered me the most is that the anime felt like it was glued to the concept of having the character be tied to a high school setting. Most of the time to the series' detriment, in my opinion. A lot of moments felt less impactful because of the emotional and total whiplash that going from Zero murdering and strategizing his way through a war to Lelouch's silly high school shenanigans resulted in. While this side of the story was meant to humanize Lelouch and give us a glimpse of his life outside the conniving and charismatic Zero, I feel this could have been accomplished in a much more riveting way by just bumping up his age a little more or toning down the almost harem-esque antics Lelouch gets into. I'd even go so far as to say that you could have dropped non-essential characters like rivals without the show missing anything of substance. In fact, the most compelling moments of his double life dealt more with hiding his identity from his sister Nunnally, the girl who fell in love with him Shirley, and the freedom fighter Cowan, who shared the same double life without knowing Zero was Lelouch for the first half of the series. Connected to this flaw is the amounts of convenient storytelling that took place in the show, with one of the earliest being Shirley's dad's death during one of Lelouch's battles with Britannia. If there had been some kind of prior setup to the actual death, giving the viewer information of the dad's whereabouts, or even showing the father working in the city that was eventually destroyed by the mudslide, there would have been a much more emotional connection and actual foreboding prior to the event taking place, instead of just being mentioned after the fact to segue into the next arc with Shirley dealing with the dad's death. This isn't the only plot contrivance Code Geass displayed though, with a lot of characters' deaths being faked out, more than once in some cases. While the trope of if the body isn't shown then the character hasn't truly died has been done very well in many forms of media, and I feel a little too overdone in general, this was definitely taken to extremes with the sheer amounts of people who ended up coming back across the 50-episode series. As a result, 2 of the actual deaths in the show, Shelly's and Yuffie's, felt less impactful than they would have if there hadn't been direct evidence of characters being brought back from literal death previously, and sometimes even twice like in Jeremiah's case. But honestly, despite all of this, I did enjoy the experience, and a lot of that has to do with the art style of the show, which holds up really well a whole decade later, especially with the various mechs the show ends up giving us. Seeing traditionally animated mechs is a rare treat these days in 2017, and Sunrise is undoubtedly a masterclass at delivering that hot, sexy mech-on-mech action. Just look at the way they beat the ever-loving crap out of each other! Oh yeah, get 'em Callie, yeah! One of the things that struck me the most about the mechs is that each of them went through so many iterations. Even more so than a more recent example like Iron-Blooded Orphans, which I can only imagine was to drive sales of each different type. While I would have liked more variety in their designs, like Knights and Magic's fascination with non-human configurations, I'm actually pretty okay with how Code Geass did it as well, because the intertwining of the reasons they kept getting so many redesigns meshed well with the story itself. It gets to the point where Callan's and Suzuku's mechs become extremely similar, thanks to the opposing geniuses of Lloyd and Rakshata working improvements into each other's designs, which I found was very clever as a means of advancing technology in the world. On a similar note, I was pleasantly, and annoyingly, surprised by how well Lelouch's Geass was balanced compared to the obstacles in his way. In a lesser series, Lelouch would have been walking all over people the entire time, since his Geass is extremely powerful. But even with a few people knowing about it or its weaknesses, Lelouch still has trouble using it in a lot of situations, which makes him lose or retreat a lot more than I expected. In fact, the biggest problem Lelouch faces in the series is that he has to rely on people and their free will, a poignant counterpoint both in and himself and the way his first fight against Britannia went, with troops failing to capitalize on his directions and even running away, compared to his last fight with brainwashed soldiers doing exactly as he commanded, down to sacrificing their lives unquestioningly to further his battle plans. There's a lot of good storytelling in this show, and it pains me to say that Cece wasn't utilized as much or as well as I would have wanted comparatively. I would have liked more moments of her taking Zero's place, sort of how Light uses Misa in Death Note, or for her to become a heavier hitter in the politics of their allies and enemies. Most of the time, she just stuck to the shadows, eating pizza and offering Lelouch the opportunity to concentrate on strategy while she flew the mech around, which I felt was less satisfactory than I wanted out of a show that uses its other characters a little bit better in my opinion. I suppose it's the same problem I have with Nia in Gurren Lagann's second half. I just want her to play a more active role because I want to see more of her. But maybe it's less of a problem in Code Geass because Cece is supposed to ever be the outsider, out of time and place thanks to her immortality, both in mind and in action. The more I think about the show, the more I find fascinating concepts to analyze, because, like I said before, Code Geass has a lot of interesting ideas inside of it. However, the story of Code Geass is still very flawed, with a bunch of minor quibbles and a few big decisions I actually find a little bit questionable. For instance, the idiot ball Lelouch had to hold in order to make Yuffie slaughter all the Japanese in Sunrise's typical kill all the people massacre episode. Sure, the idea that Yuffie, a person so ingrained in pureness, being forced to commit genocide on an entire race that she honestly loves and supports thanks to Suzaku, is compelling and extremely sad. But the way it was forced by the plot was enough to make me groan aloud while watching the moment happen. Out of all the examples Lelouch could have given to her, kill the Japanese was the most non-person response anyone could have ever given. Not to mention, it was phrased as a hypothetical command, which seems a little circumspect as a way as Geass works, since there seems to have to be some kind of intention to command as a king for it to work. Though, admittedly, we really only see this before his Geass unlocks fully. Lelouch does take steps to make sure it never happens again, and while this is smart and in character for him, it makes this moment feel that much more out of place compared to everything else that happens with Geass in the show. The only other character to have incidental use of Geass was Mao, and his power was much more passive than commanding someone. Personally, I think it might have been wise to make Lelouch accidentally use it on someone else later in the show, if only to make it more of a threat like the scene with Yuffie made it seem. Getting a magic contact lens was a little too convenient for my tastes, and I think forcing him to stay behind the Mask of Zero and abandoning the school plotline altogether because of his new handicap would have been infinitely more interesting for me. Also, I feel like the show went into overdrive a little bit after Charles died. Almost too fast. Like the people behind the story got to the climax of the show, realized they still had some plot threads to tie up, and only a few episodes left to finish in. Lelouch becoming the king and getting Britannia on his side could have been an entire half season or more. But I suppose there's audience fatigue to consider. Code Geass was becoming a little long at this point. Still, with how popular Game of Thrones is, I feel like this could have easily done well as another longer arc. Politics is actually really fun to look at. Just ask Ned. Oh, wait, yeah. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the show. Despite its flaws, I had a lot of fun with Code Geass, binging it as I did. It felt a little more hollow watching it for the first time now, a decade later, than it probably would have been watching it week to week when it first aired. But alas, I can't really go back in time. And I really didn't want to wait a week between episodes when they were all right there. Oh yeah, also, funny story. Before going into the show, I totally thought it was going to be set in space on a much larger scale, so I kept waiting for it to hit the space age. The Jupiter imagery in the show furthered my expectations, but it never really came, aside from watching this giant dildonic weapons platform burn in the sun. Hey, wait a second. Maybe they could have gone to space this entire time. Hey everybody, Croswynd here. You might have noticed there wasn't a video last week, and the reason for that is because there might have been a little hurricane over my town. You might have heard of it, Hurricane Harvey. Yeah. Well, luckily it didn't do any damage to anything I own or all the things I live in. It just kind of crept up to the backyard and kept me contained in my house for a couple days, and I'm kind of running low on food, but nothing to worry about. Anyway, if you like this video, let me know how much you did by leaving a comment down below. You can even rant and compliment me as your heart desires, because I do read every comment, at least so far. It might get a little harder to do as I get more popular. And on that note, if you want to see me grow and get a little better as an anime analyst and channel in general, why don't you hit that subscribe button and the notification button as well, so you can get up-to-the-minute updates on everything that I do. And if you want to talk to me directly, you can always talk to me on Twitter, at Croswynd. Oh, and if you think any of your friends might like what I do, give it a share, because I do want to grow my fan base, and the best way to do that is for you guys to share what I do. And remember, even if we disagree, always enjoy the way you watch anime. Because as long as you're having fun, really, that is the only thing that matters. Because you're having fun. Other people's opinions is not going to do anything to that. But anyway, see you next time.